I'm going to jump right into some bios. Nicole is the founder of the Utah Consent Coalition. She specializes in working with individuals and couples on sex-related topics. Nicole appreciated the role that psychedelics can play in the healing and healing past traumas. No topic is taboo for Nicole as she works to create safe environments that encourage openness, conversation, and healing. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Sara Stanley Urquhart runs a consulting business and varied projects. She has an extensive history of nonprofit work, nonprofit board work, and has started and run many businesses. Sara discovered plant medicine and has used it extensively, along with traditional therapy on her road toward healing. She now is a strong advocate for the healing that plant medicine can provide to those suffering from lifelong traumas. She's working to normalize plant medicine use and says, if something can heal you, why would we be ashamed to use it or talk about it? We should be shouting from the rooftops. I love that. Sara has her bachelor's degree from BYU and her master's of emergency planning from Jacksonville State University. So Sara and Nicole, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you.
Hi, Nicole. I'm really excited for all of you to hear from Nicole. When she says no topic is taboo, she really means it. It's been, I think I'm super open, but I'm just amazed at how comfortable she just is with things that make me uncomfortable. So save your hard questions for her and throw me the softballs. But no, I want to start with a question, if that's okay. And if you are not comfortable with this, do not answer. But if you are, I would like to see can you guys all see how to raise your hand there under the panelist list? I would actually like to see a hand raised if you are willing to out yourself and you've tried plant medicine. If you're not, that's completely okay. No shame either way. Okay, so we have, yeah, me too. We have a number, and then we have a number of people who either are not willing to admit it, or probably you're here to find out about it. And that you are in the right place, because one of the things I really want to push is I want to try and normalize this. I want this to be, I have found such important healing that it's what I said, what Gabe said in my bio. I just want everyone to know about this because it's just so exciting to me. And it has really opened up healing in a way that, I go along with my traditional therapist as well, and we'll talk about that. But I want people to feel comfortable talking about this, seeking it, experiencing it, and then learning from it. So those are all the things we're going to be talking about today. First of all, so we're going to just kind of do ours as kind of a conversation. So Nicole, I'm going to ask you to tell an experience or two, kind of how have you experienced plant medicine and how has it helped you heal in some ways?
My experiences with plant medicine have been varied. I've tried several different kinds in several different contexts, some recreational, some therapeutic. I think one of the most powerful ones was shortly after my sister passed away last year. I was invited to go on a weekend plant medicine journey, and we went into southern Utah in this like tiny slot canyon. And the guides I was with were absolutely incredible in terms of, setting the space and some things we'll kind of talk about. But the intention of this whole thing was, to look at some things that maybe we were finding blocks in our lives and heal, bring them to the surface and try to be together as a group, like, hey, we're all in this together kind of a thing, and heal. And it was, just weeks after she'd passed, and the situation, her passing had so many details and nuances and stuff that processing this thing was big. And I was in great company, but I completely fell apart. Like, I feel like I processed all of my grief, like I wouldn't say all of it, but 80% of this grief over the course of that weekend. But it was a way to kind of break down the ways that we're used to thinking of things and the stories that we have in our heads around anything but death in this case, and what that meant, and really like process it with all the options available to us. And so I was able to look at it from a different perspective, and really come to this place of like, you know, what would she want me to carry forth? Would she want me to, her death to be the end of me and my life and success and whatever? Or would she want me to carry these ideals that she stood for and these messages forward to honor her and maybe show love to some other people that were in circumstances she was in, as a way to kind of pay it forward? And it was just beautiful because it allowed us to look at things from a new way, and, you know, processing through that and coming out of that canyon, the hike, and like, you know, moving things through your body, and you get a lot of time to think and introspect, was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea that's what we were doing. But I really felt like it was this big, deep dive into really like existentialism, like what it meant to exist as a human and how we all interact and what life and death mean. And it was a beautiful, beautiful process. And I believe that that really set me up to be able to work then with my counselor going forward and kind of move through this in a healthy way instead of allowing it to impact my life in negative ways.
I love that. I love that actually a lot. And I have some of my own experiences, but I think I'm going to save them and tell some of the stories as we go through. So one of the first things we want to talk about, we want to get into some nuts and bolts. And if we're still being too vague for you, let us know in the chat. But you know, some of this is, we're giving you some guidelines on how to do things. And then it's really up to you to determine your comfort level, what, you know, what your intentions are, what, you know, who you feel good with as a counselor or a guide. So just know that we are being a little vague because it's a different answer for every person, but we're trying to set up questions that you can ask yourself. And help you identify what some red flags are. So I'm going to talk for a second about choosing a guide. And I'm going to start, let's use Nicole's example out of the gate. Nicole is talking about this experience and hiking into the wilderness and being with a group of people and being out in nature. All of those things sound wonderful for Nicole. They do not sound good for me. There are a number of those things on the list actually make me scared. They make me very uncomfortable. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means what Nicole needs and what I need are very, very different. I am always looking for a guide who will allow more private use. If they'll come into my home, hallelujah, that's even better because I'm super comfortable here. I have my own anxieties like so many of us have. And to be in my home, it feels a lot safer. To be, you know, a lot of times they won't, there are places or guides that won't let couples participate, but I actually really feel a lot safer when my husband's there. Not for any reason other than he is my person. And when I'm feeling super vulnerable, I just want to be able to talk to him. Sometimes I just need to see him and I know I'm okay. That's not a gender thing. That's just a personality thing. I hope I'm communicating that. You know, yeah, I've had some outdoor experiences that actually I have sensory issues. I'm a little bit on the spectrum. And so it was this light and sound dance show that probably we'll mention in the chat at some point because some of you will be interested. It was super overwhelming to me. I had to keep my eyes closed, my head down, because it wasn't bad. It just was too much. So, and I see Trevor or somebody in the chat saying they'd rather be outdoors. I totally get that. So you need to decide what resonates with you. And then you need to start finding a guide who can help deliver those things. You may have and it's like dating. You may have a big checklist. There are going to be some things that are non-negotiable. and know what those are, but then lots of negotiable things. And so, and then you get some of those, you may not get them all. So be thinking like that when you're looking for a guide. You know, what is it? And sometimes that changes too. Sometimes you want something very specific, and then another time you feel called to a group, you feel like, you know, that's what you want. And I'm using phrases like you're called to that. I'm not a hippie, but I don't know how else to talk about some of this stuff. You really are, until you're really called to some of these specific plant medicines, you shouldn't be participating. There's no peer pressure on this. At least you shouldn't feel that. And if you're uncomfortable in the moment, you know, Shayla mentioned that earlier, you need to stop what's happening so that you can feel safe. So those are kind of some general things. Nicole, what do you suggest when people are looking for a guide?
Yeah, definitely comfort level, experience level. You know, what you're looking to accomplish, I think, has a lot to do with it. I've met a lot of people that can guide and journey, that are really good with something like grief, you know, but may not be set up for some other issue that you may have. If it's like a relationship issue, I think just like therapists and counselors, there's some that are really good at relationships and marriages and may not be with, you know, grief or these types of things. So I think that has a lot to do with it, where they want to be, where you want to be. I mean, but I think for the most part, there's a trust thing, like somebody that you can trust to keep you safe and you're comfortable with, because if you know, wander and veer off a path somewhere, you want to know that you're going to feel comfortable with them in that space and follow them and want to trust them because you trust, you know, their intentions and their that they have your best interests at heart.
I love that. And a good guide, know this, a good guide, you're going to get there, you're going to be in the moment. And if you start to feel uncomfortable and you say, you know what, this just isn't it. I had a fight with my husband, or you know, something just before I got here. A good guide is not offended when you're ready to go, even if it's pre-ceremony. So if somebody's offended and they take it personally, that's another red flag. And that should validate the fact that you want to leave is the right thing to do. I had a friend who was went to do ayahuasca, and she went to this this group. She'd had a number of friends, personal friends, who had experiences with this particular guide. And she got there and she just said it felt so dark. It felt dangerous being there, but she thought maybe I'm just scared. And so she stayed there. She second guessed her own gut, and she stayed there, and she ended up having a not good experience. That was too awkward. Her experience was not good. And she's had to, and we have to remember that these ceremonial traumas, those can be real things. And so you want to protect yourself from those things. And so a good guide will talk you through what expectations are. In fact, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. And Nicole, I do want you to talk a lot about this, setting the parameters, the container role, those kinds of things. But a good guide will kind of lay these things out. And these are things Nicole will kind of dive into. And if they don't, you can ask, what should I expect? How will this happen? And if your guide is super vague about it, or just wants you to completely trust him, if you're okay with that, fine. But my trust level, I'm like, no, I want to know the details. I want to know kind of what to expect from you, what the expectations are about me. And so I kind of know how everything's going to unroll during the ceremony. And of course, I can't predict what's going to happen in my own mind. I can't predict anybody else in the room, but there are some things I can predict, and I want to know those things. So, okay, with that said, why don't you jump into the container and kind of define what some of that is so people who are new to the space know.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. I feel very strongly about that stuff. When we talk about container in a therapeutic or psychedelic like journey context, I think what we're referring to is the idea of setting the parameters and the boundaries, right? And that may be something as simple as like, we're staying in the house. But you know, these will, let me step back. Psychedelics can take you to places you don't anticipate. And that's kind of the point, right? If you could get yourself there, you probably would have. So the whole idea is to see things in a new way, to have a new experience, to feel things differently than the way you've been feeling. And what that can lead to sometimes is things that you may be inspired to do, to go on a walk or to go somewhere or to talk about something you didn't think you were going to talk about. And so having an idea up front of what's okay and what's, you know, not or whatever is critical. And when we talk about things like have a guide that you can trust, I want to kind of touch back on that too, because I think it starts there. If you talk to somebody, everybody has a different way of doing things. And sometimes the way you do psychedelics and journeys may be different than the way you normally do things. For example, I'm one that likes to know the parameters very defined. I like to have that. But in this particular case, this one that was powerful, it was also part of my experience to let go of some of that and to be like, okay, I'm going to show up that way. And having a guide that holds space for how you need to process and what you need to work through, but also being able to keep it on course and bring you back through is huge. And that happens, I think, with two really critical things that start with your guide, right? We all have blind spots or sensitive spots. And I think it shows more to a guide's character to be able to say, here are some things that I'm not comfortable with, or here are some things that I don't work well with. You know, I can hold space for a lot of things. Like in my introduction, nothing is taboo. I love the stuff that's taboo because that's the stuff that is really vulnerable and people don't get to share a lot. So for me, that's an honor. And I can be like, yes, let's talk about that. Let's bring up those things that you haven't been able to go anywhere else for. But there may still be some things in there that I'm like, okay, that's something I'm not sure if I'm ready to hold space for that, because I might get my own feelings and stuff mixed in. And that's, I think that's a big thing of setting that space. But also setting the intention, right? When you talk to your guide, like, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what I'm working towards, this is what I'm getting at. And the reason for that is because, like I said, if you wander, they can help bring you back. Hey, we were going to talk about this thing, we're going to do this thing, here we go. And then from there, you can create the space. Okay, so then what does that look like? You know, in my example, while we're in, you know, in the middle of southern Utah in this canyon, there's not a lot of places really you can go, but I managed to. Like, I think I walked off with one of the guides, I don't know, a mile or something, trudging through this creek, talking about things. But, you know, he was very good to be like, okay, you know, we're not going to go that way. You know, let's bring it back here and let's go back this way. So physical container is one. Where are we allowed to be? Are we going to go out in the world? Are we going to stay here? Things that are comfortable to talk about, things that are comfortable to do. Can you change your clothes? Can you get naked? Can you shower? Can you snuggle? Can we touch? Can you rub my back? What if I need a hug? Like, all these things are really, you know, common.
And we should talk about those things before it begins. That's what you're saying, is set those parameters so that someone's not moving up on you and rubbing your back when that's something you didn't talk about. You know, it's because not all of us are comfortable with that. But okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. And things can kind of shift a little. So there's some, you know, space. But if you're a person that doesn't like to be touched, or, I mean, especially, and a guide would generally know this, if you're working through something traumatic, not to touch you without your awareness and consent. But, you know, if it's like you're in the middle of this like emotional purge and they come up and hug you and you're like, oh, that can be a really hard thing, you know? So if you know in advance, I don't like to be hugged. When I get in that space, I don't, just leave me for a second and let me, you know, process through it. Or like, no, please hold me. Just wrap, if I get there, just wrap yourself around me and hold me. It helps oftentimes. I love to use BDSM analogies because I don't think, you know, these ideals get spread through life a lot, but the safe word idea, right? What if something happens? Is there a point where I have a stop, like a hard stop? Like I told you in advance that I like to be held and hugged, but if I don't feel safe, if I need to stop processing or talking, I can go to this word. and like I can invoke the banana, and that means everybody kind of stops and like, okay, let's give her space to like breathe for a minute, or how do we handle that? I think all those things are things that, may or may not even come up, but having set a framework for it eases your mind.
That's
Going in,
exactly
you're like, okay, I'm safe. I know what's going to happen. I know how it's going to look. And then I can move forward from there. And a lot of times it's our fear and our anxiety about the journey itself that take us to the darker spaces more than the actual journey or process or psychedelic itself. So quelling those things up front, set that container, and allow you to have the most productive experience possible.
I love that. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my first experience. Steve and I ended up in, because I'm a rule follower, or have been, we ended up in The Hague, outside of Amsterdam, for our first experience. We were in someone's home. It was just me and Steve and her. And, she was talking through some of these things. And one of the things she asked is, what do you guys want? And she, kind of gave us some options. Do you want drums and eagle feathers and candles? And I was like, no, I don't want any of that. I mean, that's going back to that. I'm not a hippie. Hippies are fine. I do not connect to that at all. It always feels a little funny to me. So I was saying, no, I just want to be left in the corner. And Steve's over there going, give me everything. I want it all. And I remember in this ayahuasca experience, sitting on the one side of the room, watching her go over him with the eagle feathers and the drums. And it was all across the room, and she was letting me have my space. But I was like, oh, I'm so glad she's not close to me, because this is not what I signed up for. So you really can ask for the experience that you think is going to resonate with you. And the other reason I talk about, or I wanted to mention this first experience, is I was very nervous this first time, and I had my foot on the brakes. She was giving me high dosage because nothing was working. I had my foot on the brakes, and I was super worried about being out of control. And I didn't feel safe. And I was raised like some of you with all these horrible stories in my mind of what this was going to do to me. But it was super interesting to me that I was able to put on the brakes for most of my ceremony. And by the end of it, I was really kind of disappointed. I'm like, well, nothing happened. And I wanted to blame my guide. I wanted to blame the medicine. And she was super patient with me. And she just said, Sara, the medicine is in your body. It's going to be in your body for at least 24 hours. Let it just do its thing. I'm like, I rolled my eyes. Yeah, whatever. And I went to sleep. And as I came out of my sleep, I slept for maybe 2 hours, more like a nap. But as I came out of it, I was in that space between sleep and awake. I just went through these things that had been bothering me, these things that had been weighing on me. I kind of went through this list one at a time. And it was able, I woke up, and having just had that experience, and I said to Steve, we can go. I'm done. I had my experience, so he saw all the visions. He dove all in, and I was able to put my brakes on, but I still had this incredible experience. Now that allowed me, the next time we went to the same place, but I felt safe there. I knew how to lean into it a little better. And I'm not going to say the first time was bad. I'm glad I had it, because it allowed me to feel safe the next time. If she tried to bully me or tell me I was doing it wrong, it would have been horrible. So because she gave me that space, I could have a really great I had a good first experience, and a really great second experience. And it's been good for me to be able to see where I can set my parameters, where I can set expectations, and that this is my experience and I'm going to own it. So give yourself permission on all of those fronts. Let's talk for a minute. Well, I'm going to kind of backtrack on that story again, and I'm going to talk about intention, if that's okay, Nicole. So before we went on that first trip, well, we were literally in Amsterdam, so I'm saying a trip, but before we went, I happened to have a session with my therapist. And I come from a Mormon background, and he sits on a bishopric. But he'd been my therapist for long enough. He'd been through my whole faith transition and other issues in my life. I just was not about to start with a new therapist because I just couldn't do it all again. So he was my therapist. And I said to him, I walked into the therapy session before we went away, and I said, all right, I am so sick of these topics. We're talking about the same things over and over again. We're not making any progress. So here's my list of 6 things, and we're just going to solve them all today. And he patiently said, Sarah, that's just not how therapy works. I'm like, I'm bored of this. You have to be going crazy. So we ended up with having a horrible session. I left upset. Totally my fault, of course. And he was, he tried to apologize that I had such a bad session. But I left 2 weeks later. We found ourselves in Amsterdam, and I'm having this ayahuasca experience. So as I came out of that first sleep, that's the list I went down. He couldn't help me, but I went down that list going, put a pin in that. This one, here's how to resolve it. This one, and these are things that had been in my mind for ever. For years. These were major traumas that I had been dealing with. And I just kept, the more I thought about them, the more entrenched they became in my mind. And I think the plant medicine made my brain a little more malleable, like when you're a child. And my thoughts were able to move up out of that trench and create new pathways. And so I went through all 6 of my things, and then I was able to go back to my therapist and say, this was awesome. And then he and I used the answers that I got from the plant medicine. We used them for a whole year to map out the therapy I was going to continue to have. So it's a way that I loved him. I still love him, because even though he's full Mormon, he makes room for this kind of thing. And he has done a lot of research, and especially since he knew I was going to have the experience. By the time I came back, he'd done a lot of research on how he could help me. And he's continued to do that so that he could be a good support to me. And we are going to talk a little bit about therapists and that kind of thing, and what we call integration. And I'm going to say, it's great if you have a therapist who uses plant medicine. I'm sure they can provide insights that others can't, but any good therapist they don't have to have all your experiences to be able to help you. And so, someone who has never been divorced might be able to help you, or who hasn't had a faith transition can help you, because they're looking at overall things. So if you need someone like that, great. But if I'm saying there are other ways to do that. So, okay, I've just said all of that. Nicole, tell me some of your experience related to intention. Oh, so let me tie that up though. I hadn't really set an intention. I actually picked one of the things on my list, but because I had that list already in my mind, that became my intention for the night, and it directed all my thoughts as I was really coming out of it. So that's one way that I've seen intention really, really work. So that's
exactly what I was going to say, is that even if you don't consciously set an intention, you have an intention going into this. And it can be something as simple as, I want to, have a recreational experience. I just want to party. But making it conscious helps guide your experience. Because if it's not conscious, whatever's going on in your subconscious is what comes out. And a lot of times it's going to be the stuff that you don't know what to do with, and you need a new way of thinking about. I love that you said it kind of breaks down and made your brain more malleable. The analogy I like to use is, I remember I was in this slot canyon after having trudged through, a mile of the creek, right? Collapsing and crying and getting up and talking and processing and collapsing. And I was drenched. So I go into my tent trying to change my clothes, and because I know that this happens. So I had tried my best. I had outfits separated. So I didn't have a bag of just random stuff. I had pants and a shirt in a bag. And I'm like, hey, I know I need this on, but I don't know how to do it. And I was like, okay, so these pants have to go here. And that means these have to come off, I think, and I don't know how to take my pants off. And it was hilarious when you think of it that way, but it's because we are so used to doing that, we don't think about it consciously anymore. And it's an automatic process. I know to, take my waistband down, pull a foot out, pull the other foot out, without having to think through it, and it breaks all that down. So now you have to stop and go, oh, what are all the steps here? But that's exactly the point of the medicine, is to break down those automatic assumptions and processes that kept you right where you are. Like, I know exactly how this works and I can't get out of it. So then when you go back to the beginning and you're like, oh, there's all these other options, I better stop and think through. Maybe it is this thing, maybe it's not. And the intention is really powerful in that regard, because that's, your mind and your body and your soul crave healing and I want to say closure, but that's not the right word there, but process, movement, growth, it craves it and it's going to move you that way. And so if you don't consciously have an idea of what you're trying to do or where you're trying to go with this thing, your body is going to find the thing in your mind. You're going to find the thing that you've been wanting to work through and needing to heal and pull that out. And I'm not saying avoid it by setting another intention, but I think making it conscious, it will make it so it's not unexpected. If I had been like, oh, I'm just going to go party in the Red Rock country with my friends, and then been like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to deal with grief, I would have been like floored to have to deal with that. But I was like, no, I'm going to process through some of this grief and see if I can find a different way of looking at this. Then when these things started coming up and it was messy, I was like, hey, that's what this is. Like, this is the mess, I've got to deal with it. And like I said, a lot of times it's the fear of the things and the anticipation or anxiety we have around the process, or the uncomfortable feelings that we've been avoiding, that can make the experience a little bit more shadowed than the process itself. So having all of that kind of, and we call it intention, because I want to take a sidestep there too, because it doesn't always go that way. So it's like the best of our intentions. It's not an expectation. It's not a rule. It's not a, this is what I'm doing, this is the topic. It's like, my intention is to deal with this thing, but sometimes there might be something underneath it. There might be a deeper issue that you're like, wow, I came in here with the intention of dealing with my divorce, but that took me all the way back to my childhood. And I had to start looking at the issues with my dad. And like, I wasn't expecting that, but having gone through that also helped me resolve this thing with my divorce. And I was like, I didn't realize those were even connected. And that also helps you connect the experience if it does take a different path to your original intention, and go, oh, that's how these are all related, and kind of bring it full circle.
I love that, Nicole. Thank you. It's, I'm going to out Steve on this. He tells us all the time, but his intention is, he thinks so big. How can I change the world? And the message is always, do more dishes. Spend more time with your daughter, be nice to your wife. So he's, he wants to get out there and that is how he's going to change the world. These simple acts, he wants to make it huge. And the plant medicine and his brain keeps coming back to this is the box, and this is your world. This is what you need to do. So I always think that's interesting with an intention. I want to talk about integration next, and as we kind of wrap up here, so we can leave some time for questions. Integration is, if you're new to this space, you're learning some new phrases here. Sometimes people will call some of this use recreational. And if you're an adult, I don't call anything in this, especially with psychedelics, recreational, because you don't know what kind of experience you're going to have. And sometimes something that feels kind of fun and silly can also be one of your most spiritual experiences. So I like to use the phrase adult use, that there's adult use, or, if children are doing it, we think that's not a good thing. So then avoid it with children, but adult use is in almost all forms, in all safe forms, is we think are a good thing. So, or I'll speak for myself, I think it's a good thing. But there's a difference between, this is just kind of fun and playful, and here's a lesson I learned. But if you don't take additional steps, then it's kind of, maybe it's like watching a movie. You've had this experience, but if you don't internalize it, then you're not, then for me, what's the point? I really, really like the integration process. So how do you take it from this experience with lessons and make it a life change? So first of all, we need to talk about short-term integration. Nicole, do you want to talk about that for a second? Because those were your
short-term, kind of in my example of like hiking out of this canyon. It was this big long hike. It was ridiculously hot. I had this really ridiculously heavy pack, and a couple of the guys were helping carry it and they wouldn't give it back to me. They were like ping-ponging it. So I was like, well, I don't get a bitch about this walk. Pardon my language, but they're carrying my pack and theirs. So I don't get to complain and be like, oh my gosh, it's hot. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And what that did is it allowed me to like think through my process, right? Instead of, I tend to process out loud. So I was like, what happened? And you start remembering, you start going back. Okay. I went here. Oh, wow. I remember like the music cutting through the canyon, and it like hit me in my soul. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. What does that mean? And you start like, I felt like that was like an angel calling me back to life. Like, wow, when you're going through, oh my gosh, and I had this thing, and then somebody said this. So that's still the processing, and that happens 24, 48 hours a week, sometimes out. When it comes to integration, I highly recommend any form of record keeping that you can do in the experience, feel comfortable with, or have support with. And this is part of the reason why it's great to have a guide or a buddy, because you can help each other remember. But writing stuff down, sometimes it's difficult to write, but you can record, do voice recorders, do videos, and just talk to yourself. Anything, art, whatever your medium is, something to like put down what you did. And then certainly as you're processing and you're coming out of it, maybe now you've sobered up, it's the next day, you're a little bit more coherent. That's an amazing time to just stop and sit in the cart and just like write it all down.
Yes.
Go on a drive. I always go on a drive after I do a journey. After I'm well, sober and over all that, I like to go on a drive for at least an hour. And, I'll just drive up through the canyons and look at trees and get in nature, or a walk or a hike, and just like move, because it keeps me out of my environment where I'm like, oh, I have to do dishes and laundry and, answer phones or whatever. And I just process and think it through and write it down. So short-term integration to me is a lot of record keeping, and talking it out with other people that might've been there, because you're like, wait, what happened here? And when did we do this? Okay, we went on the bike ride. Was that before or after we went over to the baseball diamond? Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. And we were talking about, oh, I forgot about this thing. And you're able to kind of connect that and remember it, which helps you see what's going on. And then when you write down notes, when they're raw and fresh, you can come back and it helps you remember. One really cool thing, a trip I learned, sorry, I get excited about this, on one of these journeys, was my friend said, bookmark this. Kind of like in your car stereo, when a radio station comes on and you like hold the one down, right? And it saves that station on your number one. So you can recall it. Like, it helps you bookmark this moment and this feeling. So you can like stop and connect back to it. Okay, I'm going to look around. I'm going to look at the colors, because they're freaking phenomenal right now. I'm in this hammock in the middle of the woods. And it's like the colors are changing. The air is this beautiful temperature. I've got close friends by me. I was like, this is the happiest I've ever felt in my life. And he was like, bookmark this. And I did. So I was like, okay, connect all the things, connect the color, connect the air feeling on my skin, connect the people I was with, connect how my body feels, and take all of that and really just bookmark it, right? And you can write that down or put it in a video or something. And then when I have things where I'm feeling off center or ungrounded, I can come back and I can read that page I wrote and recall that bookmark and be like, okay, we're back. I remember how I felt there. And then long-term integration, you're probably going to talk about more, I think, with another panelist, but that kind of is where you can come into taking it back to your counselor or therapist or coach or friend or partner and be like, okay, now as I move through life, how does this shift for me? I have this whole new way of looking at things. Well, how else does that affect all these things in my life? Like, oh, I talked about, saving the world and I was told to do dishes. So can you help me kind of remember sometimes? You're like, hey, those dishes aren't done,
Right.
savior of the world, and it helps you remember and integrate, like connecting back to that until it becomes a habit.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Giving yourself time after, and for me and my partner, Steve being my partner, whichever one of us takes a plant medicine trip, we do a ton of talking after. We do downloads with each other. But yes, taking those notes. And then there are a lot of things we could say about long-term integration, but we actually do have other people. We actually have therapists who are going to be on in one of our sessions. So I'm going to wrap this up here, and we'll see if you guys, I can already see some questions in the Q&A. So we'll let Gabe take over now. And thank you for listening to us. Thank you for letting us share some of our stories with you.
Those were definitely some powerful stories. Thanks for sharing that. One question I have, and I'm seeing it pop up in the chat. Nicole, I'm going to direct this at you. Do you think a guide's necessary, or can you do this healing on your own when you're incorporating psychedelics?
I highly recommend having at least a buddy, if not a guide. And it's nice to have somebody that's more sober than you, because if you're both kind of deep in process and journey, it can be hard to shift. I think a lot of that's going to come back to your experience level with it, the intention, the context and setting, all these different things. And I've done both ways. I've done them guided with an official guide and a full intention. I've done it with just a buddy. I've done them solo. My solo experiences were kind of neat because you can be more introspective, and feeling experienced enough with the particular psychedelic. I didn't feel like I was at risk of, health or safety. But, having maybe somebody that can check on you later or the next day or something, like, hey, I'm just going to go hike and kind of have this thing. But I always recommend it because there's pieces that fell out. I was deep in introspection and thought, and I remember having a lot of really powerful realizations. But it's hard to write again, and unless you think to pull out your voice recorder and talk about it all, you miss pieces of it later. And so then, you go through your journey, maybe you go to sleep, you wake up the next day and you're like pulling pieces together and you're like, oh, how did that happen? How did I get from here to here and where? And I just feel like for a therapeutic sense, it's helpful to have somebody that can help kind of trigger some of those memories, to come back. So, and certainly safety and all that, your first several times, always have somebody there.
Until you get used to the space, I would say, because once you start getting used to it, then I could see people wanting possibly to do it alone. But your first few times, it's like being on another planet a little bit. And so, yeah, you just, if you have somebody there who can help you navigate it, you're far safer.
Because they're not legal and regulated, you don't know if you're going to get, you may have done something 2 or 3 times and you get the same thing, and it may have a different chemical mix or balance of, a little bit more of this than this thing, or, sometimes people can blend things different, or a different species or breed of like a mushroom or whatever. And you may have a different experience than you've had before, and you don't know sometimes. So I feel like it's always best to have somebody with you.
So you talked a lot about intention, and working. Let's go back to working with guides. How do you work with a guide on intention? I've never experienced a session with a guide or anything like that. So, and obviously it would be different from guide to guide, but I guess in your best experiences, Sara, I'll direct this one at you. Have you worked directly with your guide in intention, or is that something more personal?
I keep it usually more personal, but but that's just, again, that's just going to be me. I will say that one of my first experiences with mushrooms, or my very first experience with mushrooms, I just did it in my home, in my room. Steve was my guide, and he'd never done that before. And he'd had some really good experiences with guides, so he thought he knew what he was doing. And of course, his intentions were great. And I had a pretty awful experience. I got into a very dark place. And when that happens, when you get into a dark place, a good guide can help you. In fact, I'll tell you, subsequently, I've had some good experiences with Steve. But one time I was in a dark place, and I said to him, I had my eyes closed, and I said, okay, I'm in a super dark place. How do I get out of this? And he was going to give me a 10-step process of how to get out of that. And he said to me, okay, open your eyes. And I opened my eyes and went, oh, yeah, that's better. And that's all I needed. I couldn't think to open my eyes. I was just watching this thing that was unfolding in front of me. And we both laughed about it a ton since then, because that's all I needed, was someone to say, open your eyes. And the first time, he wanted me, someone had taught him, lean into the dark, some of the lessons if it's dark. And I'm learning how to do that, but it was too much that first time. I shouldn't have been leaning in like I was. And he left me in this dark place. And I kept trying to say, I'm not good here. I'm not in a good place. I don't usually think like this. I'll kind of tell you, I was thinking through all these ways I could just kill myself. I mean, it was this awful place to be. And he should have pulled me out of that. He should have said, all right, let's go. And finally he did. We came out and we watched The Incredibles. We just turned on The Incredibles because I'm like, give me something light that I don't have to think about. And I've had much better experiences since then. But what I'm saying is, it can be bad. Try to have a good guide who can help you. And I just happen to be the guinea pig for Steve's lesson.
Steve's asking if you wanted to talk about that overconfident, unexperienced guide. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what he's talking about. He's like, we got it. And then it was awful. So I don't recommend.
Process differently.
What'd you say?
I said we all process differently, don't we?
Right. So, okay.
So this one's from Trevor. It says, what does it mean to have a guide instead of just a buddy or by yourself? Does the guide, I don't know, talk to you during it or something? It's kind of similar to my question, but a little more detailed.
So I'll jump into that, Nicole, if you have a follow-up. But yeah, a guide is going to be someone who has some training, some experience. So I shouldn't have called Steve a guide the first time, because he didn't have any experience. But he's getting better at it, and he's learning the things he needs to, and he's looking at formal trainings, all of those things. So find people who are like that. The very first time I did ayahuasca, I told you some of that experience, but I was having a really sad moment early in the night, overwhelmingly sad. And my guide was able to kind of get down in my face and, get kind of close to me. And she said, be kind to yourself, be good to yourself. And it kind of pulled me out of that place as well. So just so you know, I mean, you're seeing a theme here. I treat a lot of this plant medicine as medicine. I have had some traumas that I've been able to shove down into my gut and try to ignore for a lot of years. And these plant medicines are really lifting me out of that and helping me heal from most of those. And, I'm not done with my experiences, but that is what these have done for me. And so I really, if you come from, I think any human, we have those experiences. And if we haven't known how to process them in a healthy way, they're sitting in our bodies and our brains. And this Some people can figure out how to navigate through those. I was not able to do that. And so these plant medicines have really, really helped me identify traumas and then deal with them. So even though my stories are dark, it's because that's what I'm processing. And I don't do these a ton. I don't do it a ton. I do it when I'm called, when I feel like I have another trauma that I need to sift through, sort through, or process.
I think it's a great segue into another question that came through that I really want to touch on before we run out of time too. To kind of bring, the question was a difference between a guide and a buddy, and a guide is someone that's there to create your experience, to help you move through your process, and maybe not necessarily having their own, or, you know, expecting their own intention or something kind of from it. Somebody that's experienced and can talk you through these places. The segue that I like, and the question that came up here, is what do you mean by dark place, right? And when you're talking about kind of going into those dark spaces and having a guide that's experienced to move you through it, the real reason I wanted to touch on this is because the beauty of psychedelics is it allows you to think in a way you don't usually. And what that means is that it allows your mind to go to the places you don't normally allow it to go. Right? So a lot of times we stop and we keep ourselves from feeling guilt or shame from something, or sorrow or grief, because we don't like them and they're uncomfortable and they might mess us up at work or our relationships or something. And we shove those things away, and those are the shadows, right? The traumas, the stories in our heads about not being good enough, about do they like me? When you talk about like, maybe I want to leave this dimension in this world, and, you know, do I want to live or die? I was very much in that space with grief with my sister, and I'm not somebody that has a tendency to suicidality at all. But I think because you're opening up your mind to like, what are the possibilities here? What are all the options available to me? And sometimes you kind of have to feel into them and try them on for size. So that might look like, do I actually want to die? What would that feel like to want that, and to the real, like, to be in that space, you know? And it was like, no, I don't, but I don't like this dimension. I don't like that we're just here to feel pain and suffer all the time. It's all we do. And I don't like it. And it's horrible here and it's awful. And then, you know, you're like, is that what I want? No, it's not, but there's no hope here, you know? And then this music cuts through and you're like, oh, that is so beautiful. And then you go, oh, look at the flowers. And you're like, there is beauty here, you know? And you start processing different kind of so going there is how you find your way out. And the shadows and those bad trips, I think a lot of times are stuff that we really need to have a perspective on, to know that, you know, the choice that we're making is what we actually want and is what is in our greater good. And, you know, the expression, like, the light only exists in the dark. You know, how do you know you're following the light if there isn't dark too? Like, all these concepts of, you know, really just not defaulting into something. So you kind of try these on for size. So I like to destigmatize the bad trip in that sense, that it may be dark and it may be uncomfortable, but that's probably something that you've not allowed yourself to feel or experience. And that it might also be why you're blocked, because you aren't wanting to go and feel those things and at least consider the possibility of them.
Nicole, I love this. And I think it's something we do need to talk about a little more. So I'll make sure one of the future panelists talks about this, because I don't want to stop you, but we do want to give people a little time. So I'm going to let Gabe jump back in.
Thank you, Sara. And thank you, Nicole. That was a lovely, beautiful, honest discussion. It was great for hearing from you too. And as Sara said, I think we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back to harm reduction and safety.